The desert was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that only follows after too much grief. Dust Creek hadn't yet woken, but the wind was already stirring, whispering through the dry mesquite and empty corral fences. It carried with it the faint smell of gunpowder and wild sage, the ghosts of a day no one in town dared to speak of. And there, on the edge of town, sat a woman in black. Evelyn Carter had not changed her dress since the day they buried her husband. Black cotton, faded from the sun, the hem frayed with dust and time. Every dawn, she sat on her porch facing the main street, the same street where her world had come apart 1 year ago, when a bullet meant for justice found her heart instead. The man who fired it still rode that same road each morning. Sheriff Lucas Hale, tall, steady, the kind of man carved from grit and regret. The tin star on his chest caught the sunrise like a blade, though he wore it as if it burned. He'd been Dust Creek's law for 3 years now, but no amount of good deeds or quiet apologies could erase what he'd done that day. He hadn't meant to kill Tom Carter. Every soul in town knew that. Even Evelyn knew that, but knowing didn't stop the ache. It didn't stop the way her breath caught when she heard his boots on the boardwalk, or the way her hands trembled when she saw his shadow stretch across her porch. They hadn't spoken since that day. Sometimes, the sheriff would nod as he passed, hat tipping low, a silent greeting, or maybe a plea for forgiveness. She never nodded back. She didn't hate him, not anymore. Hate had burned out long ago, leaving only the hollow space where love once lived. And yet, she couldn't look away. Lucas Hale lived with ghosts too. Every night, he replayed the moment, the flash, the smoke, the sound that split his world. Tom Carter had been drunk, angry, waving his pistol outside the saloon, shouting about land and pride and betrayal. Lucas had stepped in like a fool trying to save a drowning man. But Tom drew first, and Lucas fired faster. The whole town saw. The sheriff survived, but something inside him didn't. Now, as the sun climbed higher, the quiet was broken by the sound of hooves, a distant thunder rolling over the ridge. Lucas turned from the street and saw the smoke. Not the kind that came from campfires or cooking stoves. This was darker, heavier, the color of panic. Dust Creek was burning. The riders came fast, bandits from the south, desperate men with no flags and no souls. They rode down the main street firing shots into the air, laughing like devils. Lucas shouted for cover, drawing his gun, the star on his chest catching the light one last time before the storm hit. Evelyn froze. From her porch she watched as flames leapt from the barn roof, smoke curling around the sky like a warning. Her hands shook as she tried to grab the bucket, her feet stumbling down the steps. She was halfway across the yard when the bandits spotted her, a lone woman in black, framed by fire. One of them turned his horse toward her. Evelyn's scream was swallowed by the roar of the wind and the crack of gunfire. She fell, clutching the dirt, as the rider charged, pistol raised. And then came the shot. Not from the bandit. From the sheriff. Lucas rode hard through the smoke, his revolver steady. The bullet struck true, and the outlaw tumbled from the saddle before his horse even stopped. Lucas didn't pause to watch him fall. He was already dismounting, running through the fire toward her. "Evelyn," he shouted. His voice carried through the chaos, raw, desperate. "Evelyn, get up." She looked up through the haze, through tears, through smoke, through memories she wished she could bury. And for the first time in a year, their eyes met. He reached her, pulled her to her feet, his hand warm against hers. The flames crackled around them, a wall of orange and fury, but in that moment, all she saw was his face, tired, scarred, pleading. "Come on," he said. "We've got to go." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to leave her, to let the fire take what was left of her old life. But something in his voice, that same trembling strength that had once sworn to protect her husband, stopped her. They ran together through the burning field, smoke biting at their lungs. Behind them, her home collapsed into cinders. Ahead, the sheriff's horse whinnied and stamped, ready to flee. Lucas helped her onto the saddle, his hand trembling just slightly as he touched her arm. "I won't let you die here," he said, and she heard herself whisper. She didn't know why, didn't even know if she meant it. "You already did." He flinched like she'd struck him. But he said nothing. As they rode from the flames, the wind carried the sound of the burning town, the crack of wood, the cries of the lost, and the echo of one promise neither of them had ever spoken aloud. By sundown, Dust Creek was ash, and the widow in black rode beside the man who'd once taken everything from her. the only man who could save her now. They didn't speak for hours. The desert stretched endlessly before them. A land of red stone and old sorrow, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the low thunder of the horse beneath them. The smoke from Dust Creek still rose behind them, a gray ghost chasing their tracks. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, hands clutching the saddle horn so tight her knuckles turned white. Lucas Hale rode behind her, silent as a shadow. The badge on his vest glinted in the fading light, that same badge that had cursed them both. He had worn it with pride once. Now it felt like a weight pressing into his chest, heavier with every mile. He wanted to speak, to tell her something, anything, but the words burned in his throat. What could he say? I'm sorry? He'd said that 100 times in his prayers, and God hadn't answered once. As the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the buttes, Evelyn finally broke the silence. Why'd you come for me? Her voice was low, steady, but every syllable was sharpened like glass. Lucas didn't answer right away. The wind carried the smell of smoke and blood, reminders of the life they'd left behind. When he finally spoke, it was barely louder than a whisper. Didn't think I could live with myself if you died, too. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see the cold glint in her eyes. You lived fine when you shot my husband. He swallowed hard. You know it wasn't like that. I know he's in the ground because of you. Silence again. The kind that hurt worse than words ever could. The horse's hooves clopped in rhythm, steady, unyielding. Lucas stared at the badge on his chest and thought of ripping it off, throwing it into the dust. But that badge was all he had left, the only thing standing between him and the man he might have become. By nightfall, they reached an abandoned stagecoach station, little more than a broken fence, a half-collapsed roof, and the echo of old travelers' ghosts. Evelyn dismounted first, brushing the dust from her dress. Lucas tethered the horse, grabbed his canteen, and glanced at her from across the campfire pit. I'll get a fire going, he said quietly. I don't need your help. You'll freeze without it. She hesitated, then turned away. Then I'll freeze. He didn't argue, just struck a match and lit the fire anyway. The flames flickered weakly at first, then grew, casting orange light over the two of them, two people bound by fate and something far heavier than forgiveness. After a while, the wind shifted. Evelyn pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Tom used to say the law don't care about folks like us, she said suddenly. He said men like you wear stars to make up for their sins. Lucas looked down. The badge caught the firelight again, glowing like a brand. He wasn't wrong, he said softly. She looked up, surprised by the honesty in his voice. I became sheriff because I thought it'd make up for what I've done, he continued. Turns out, all it did was remind me. The fire cracked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, long and low, like it was mourning something neither of them could name. Then Evelyn said, What happens now? Lucas stared into the flames. We ride to Sanduro. There's a marshal there. Maybe he can help round up whoever hid Dust Creek. And me? She asked. What happens to me? He looked at her, really looked. The soot on her face, the stubborn fire in her eyes, the grief that hadn't dulled but hardened. He thought about lying, telling her she'd be safe, that it was over. But he'd lied enough for one lifetime. They'll come again, he said finally. Whoever torched the town wasn't just after coin. They were sending a message. And I reckon they'll finish what they started. Evelyn's voice trembled just slightly. You mean they were after you? Lucas nodded once. Maybe, but now they'll think you're with me. She laughed bitterly. Then I guess my luck just keeps getting better. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a revolver, small, nickel-plated, clean as the day it was made. He held it out to her, handle first. You should take it, he said. She stared at it for a long time, her reflection glinting in the steel. And if I shoot you with it? His eyes met hers across the fire. Then you'd be finishing what I started. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long moment, she didn't move, then, slowly, she took the gun. Her fingers brushed his as she did, and the contact was brief but electric, not love, not yet, but something raw and human. They sat in silence until the fire burned low. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the endless black sky. Lucas leaned back against the wall of the station, hat tilted low, revolver resting across his lap. Evelyn sat on the other side of the fire, the gun he'd given her resting by her side. They didn't speak again that night. But when the first light of dawn touched the desert, she looked over and saw that the sheriff's hand had fallen open in his sleep, the badge glinting faintly in the sand beside him. And for the first time since her husband's death, she didn't look away. By the third day, the desert began to change. The red dust gave way to darker earth, cracked and wet in patches where no rain had fallen for months. The wind carried a new scent, not of smoke or sage, but of something colder, older. Evelyn noticed it first. "The air feels wrong," she murmured, glancing toward the low valley stretching ahead. Lucas didn't answer, but he'd felt it too. He'd heard the stories as a boy, of the Rio Sombra, the Shadow River. They said it ran black as ink in moonlight and never reflected a man's face twice. Travelers vanished there, cattle refused to drink, and those who camped near its banks sometimes woke to see their own names carved into the sand. But legends were for the fearful, and Lucas Hale had run out of fear a long time ago. They reached the river by sundown. It wasn't wide, but the current moved strange, not fast, yet restless, as if the water itself was thinking. The sky hung heavy and still, purple clouds crouched over the canyon rim. Evelyn dismounted, her boots sinking into the damp soil. "This is the place," she said. He frowned. "Place for what?" "For answers," she said softly, looking across the dark water. "You said whoever hid Dust Creek left tracks, maybe they came this way." Lucas crouched, running his fingers through the mud. Sure enough, there were prints, deep, clear. Horses, 5 or 6 of them, recent. But alongside them, he saw something else. Bare footprints, small, a woman's, maybe even a child's. He rose slowly. "We're not alone." They set camp on a low rise above the river. Evelyn gathered driftwood while Lucas kept watch, his rifle leaning against his shoulder. The land was too quiet, no birds, no crickets, just the slow whisper of the river winding past. After a while, Evelyn spoke again. "You ever killed someone you didn't mean to?" Lucas hesitated. "Every man with a gun has." She looked at him, eyes dark in the firelight. "But do you remember their faces?" He thought about that for a long time before answering. "All of them," he said finally. "Every one." She nodded, not judging, not forgiving, just understanding in the way only grief can. The fire crackled low. Across the river, something moved, a flicker of light, faint as a candle. Both of them froze. Lucas stood, hand on his revolver. "Stay here." But Evelyn was already rising. "No." The light wavered again, not a campfire, not a lantern. It floated low to the ground, glowing pale and steady. Then another appeared beside it. 2 lights. 3, like eyes. Lucas cocked his rifle, scanning the dark. "Could be riders," Evelyn whispered, "or it could be what this river keeps." He shot her a look. "You believe in ghost stories?" "I married one," she said quietly. "The man you shot still visits me every night." Before he could reply, a sound came drifting across the water, a voice. Faint, female, singing something that didn't belong to the living. The melody was slow, sorrowful, and carried a language neither of them could place. Lucas lowered his weapon, heart hammering in his chest. "That's not wind," he whispered. Evelyn took a step closer to the water's edge. "Tom," she murmured, her eyes wide. "Don't," Lucas barked, grabbing her arm. But she didn't stop. The song had her, the way a flame catches dry grass. She stared across the river like she saw someone standing there, someone she knew. "Evelyn." He pulled her back, hard. The spell broke. The song stopped. The lights vanished. Only the river remained, silent as before. Evelyn stumbled, clutching her head. "He was there," she gasped. "Tom, I swear it, he was calling to me." Lucas's jaw clenched. "It's the heat, the dust, maybe the smoke." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "Don't you tell me what I saw. You don't know what it's like to love a man enough to hear his voice after he's gone." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, she saw the same torment mirrored there. "Don't I?" he said quietly. The wind picked up then, cold and sudden, scattering the embers of their fire. The smell that came with it was sharp, metallic, and unmistakable. Blood. Lucas spun, rifle ready. On the far bank of the river stood a figure. Tall, motionless, wrapped in a long coat that fluttered in the wind. The face was hidden beneath a hat, but a faint glint, metal, shone at the hip. Evelyn whispered, "Tom." Lucas didn't lower his gun. "That's no man." The figure lifted its head. Even across the water, they could feel its gaze. Then, slow as a shadow at sundown, it stepped backward and sank into the dark river without a sound. Gone. Evelyn fell to her knees, trembling. "He promised to bring me home," she whispered, voice cracking. "But the dead don't cross the river." Lucas didn't answer. He just stared at the water, watching the ripples fade into nothing. And somewhere beneath that black current, something whispered back. The night settled heavy over the Rio Sombra, a darkness so thick it seemed to breathe. The fire had burned low, no more than a glow between them. Lucas sat with his back against a rock, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the black current below. He hadn't moved since the figure vanished. Evelyn hadn't spoken since she fell to her knees. The silence was a living thing, the kind that crept into your bones, that made every sound, every gust of wind, every creak of wood, feel like a whisper meant only for you. Finally, she said, almost in a whisper, "You think I've lost my mind?" Lucas didn't look at her. "I think this river plays tricks. I think it's seen too much death." Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the memory of that voice, that haunting melody that had called her name, from across the water. "You saw him too," she said softly. "That shape, the way he moved." "I saw a man-shaped shadow," Lucas muttered. "Could have been an outlaw, a drifter, hell, even a reflection." She shook her head. "Reflections don't look back." He didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, what he'd seen had chilled him deeper than any ghost story ever could. When you've buried enough men, you stop fearing the dead, but the memory of them, that's something different. He stood finally, pacing to the edge of the bluff. The moon had risen, turning the river into a slick vein of silver. He crouched, watching it move, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw faces in the current. Dozens, faint, turning toward him. He blinked, and they were gone. Behind him, Evelyn spoke again, voice thin and tired. "Tom and I used to talk about leaving Dust Creek, starting over near the coast. He said someday the wind would carry us somewhere green." Lucas turned. "He ever make it that far?" Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "He never made it past you." The words landed like a bullet. Lucas didn't flinch, but his hand clenched at his side. He thought of that day, the gun smoke, the shout, the blood in the dust. It had been over in seconds, but the sound of her scream had stayed with him ever since. "I gave him a warning," he said hoarsely. "He drew first." "I don't care who drew first," she snapped, standing now, her grief turning sharp. "You took him. You wear that badge like it forgives you, but all it does is shine a light on your sins." Lucas met her eyes. "That badge didn't forgive me. It just made sure I couldn't forget." The wind rose suddenly, sweeping sand through the camp. The fire hissed, sputtering out. For a moment, they were plunged into darkness. Then came the sound, faint, rippling, like whispers beneath the surface of the water. Dozens of voices, murmuring in a tongue that felt too old to belong to the living. Evelyn gasped, clutching his arm. "Do you hear that?" Lucas cocked his head, straining to listen. The voices rose and fell like a tide. Then one, clearer, closer, broke through the rest. A woman's voice, soft, familiar. Evelyn? Her name. Drifting on the wind, carried by the river. Her breath caught. "Tom," she whispered. Lucas drew his revolver, eyes scanning the waterline. But there was nothing, no figure, no light, just the black pulse of the river glinting under the moon. The voice came again. This time closer, louder. "Evelyn, come home." She took a step forward, barefoot now, the hem of her dress brushing the sand. Lucas reached for her wrist, but she didn't stop. The sound had her again, a pull stronger than reason or fear. "Evelyn, stop," he shouted. She didn't. Her foot touched the water. The current hissed, like steam on iron. Then something unseen yanked her downward. Lucas dove after her. The cold hit him like a gunshot, freezing, heavy, alive. He could see her, just beneath the surface, her pale hair twisting like smoke, arms reaching upward toward the moonlight. He grabbed her waist, pulling hard, but the river fought him, its current twisting around his legs, tugging like 100 hands. He kicked, forcing them both back toward the shore, lungs burning, eyes stinging. When he broke the surface, he dragged her onto the sand, coughing, sputtering, alive. Evelyn gasped for air, trembling. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't her own. "You shouldn't have come back, Sheriff." Lucas froze. Her lips had moved, but the sound that came out was lower, rougher, like two voices speaking in one. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. He held her, heart hammering. Above them, the moon slid behind the clouds. The river whispered once more, and this time, it sounded like laughter. The dawn came gray and cold. No birds sang, no wind stirred. Only the river moved, slow, patient, whispering secrets to itself. Lucas sat beside the fire pit, rifle resting against his knee, eyes fixed on the woman lying wrapped in a blanket a few feet away. Evelyn hadn't stirred since he dragged her out of the water. Her skin was pale as bone, her lips colorless. But she breathed, shallow, uneven, as though each breath had to fight its way back from somewhere far away. Lucas's hands were trembling. He'd faced down outlaws, murderers, and worse, but not this. Not the sight of her whispering another man's voice. He looked down at his hands, still raw, cut from the rocks. There was blood beneath his fingernails that wasn't his. He didn't know what had happened in that river, but whatever he'd pulled from it wasn't the same woman who'd gone in. After a while, he rose and poured water from his canteen onto a rag, wiping the dirt from her face. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a brief moment, she opened her eyes. "Evelyn," he whispered. She blinked slowly, focusing on him. Her voice was a rasp. "You pulled me out?" "Yeah," he said softly. "You're safe now." Her lips curved faintly, not into a smile, but something colder. "Safe?" she whispered. "No one's safe by this river, Sheriff. You should know that better than anyone." He froze. "What did you just?" But she turned her head away, falling back into uneasy sleep. Lucas stood, heart pounding. He looked down at her and saw it then, a dark mark along the side of her neck, faint but clear in the morning light. It wasn't a bruise. It looked like a handprint. Long, thin fingers curling toward her throat, burned into her skin as if the river itself had touched her. He swallowed hard and backed away. That's when he noticed the other thing. The badge. It wasn't on his chest anymore. It lay half buried in the sand beside her, as though someone had placed it there. He knelt, brushing away the grit, and as he picked it up, he saw something carved into the metal that hadn't been there before. One word. Murderer. He stared at it, cold crawling up his spine. He rubbed it with his thumb, but the letters didn't fade. They were etched deep, permanent. He'd worn that badge for 10 years. He'd bled for it, nearly died for it. But now it felt heavier than the gun on his hip, like it carried every sin he'd ever tried to bury. Behind him, Evelyn stirred again. Her breathing changed, faster, shallower. She whispered something, too soft to hear. Lucas leaned closer. "What is it?" Her eyes stayed closed. "Don't let him in." His jaw tightened. "Who?" She trembled, her voice breaking. "Tom." He sat back, the word hitting him like a hammer. He'd seen men haunted before. Seen grief twist the mind until it couldn't tell dream from daylight. But this wasn't that. The mark, the whisper, the voice, they were too real. Lucas walked to the riverbank. The water looked calm now, smooth and still. But when he knelt, his reflection didn't look back. Instead, another face stared up at him, pale, thin, wearing his hat, his coat, but not his eyes. The reflection smiled. Lucas stumbled backward, grabbing for his revolver, but the image rippled and vanished. Only his own face remained, hollow-eyed, gray with exhaustion. He turned sharply when Evelyn gasped behind him. She sat up, clutching her chest, eyes wide and terrified. "He's here," she said. Lucas ran to her side. "Who's here?" "The man you killed," she whispered. "He never left." Her hands shook violently. "He said you lied, Lucas. He said you didn't shoot in self-defense." Lucas froze. "What did you say?" She looked up at him then, and for a heartbeat, he saw two faces. Hers, and another, superimposed. Tom's. Her voice dropped lower. "He said you came for him first." He stood slowly, fists clenched. "That's not true." But the words rang hollow, even to him. He'd told himself for years that it had been fair. A clean draw. That Tom Lyle had pulled his gun first. But memory was a strange thing. The smoke, the sunlight, the anger. Maybe he'd reached first. Maybe he'd been waiting for an excuse. I didn't mean to, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Evelyn watched him, eyes glassy. You can't lie to the dead. The wind rose, and the river began to murmur again. That same low whisper, carrying his name now. Lucas? He turned toward the sound, but there was no one there. The water rippled once, twice, and then a hand broke the surface. Pale, familiar, gripping his badge. Lucas stumbled back, the air leaving his lungs. The hand sank again, the badge disappearing with it. Behind him, Evelyn whispered, he wants you to cross. Lucas shook his head, voice trembling. No, no one crosses that river. Evelyn's gaze drifted back to the water, her expression unreadable. Then he'll come to you. And as the sun broke over the canyon rim, Lucas Hale realized the river wasn't cursed. It was simply honest. And it was done waiting. The day bled into dusk without a sound. No coyotes, no crickets, only the steady hum of the river, thick with meaning. Lucas sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He'd rebuilt it 3 times that day, not for warmth, but to keep his hands busy. The air was too still. Evelyn hadn't spoken since morning. She sat wrapped in his coat near the horses, eyes fixed on the water, as though it were whispering things only she could hear. Every so often, she would flinch, her lips moving, murmuring a name. Tom. Lucas tried to shut it out. He told himself she was shaken, confused. That the fever had come back. But deep down, he knew better. He'd seen that river take men before. A current that ran colder than it should, slower than it should, like it waited for something. When night came again, the moon rose full and pale over the canyon. The river caught its light like glass. Lucas stood, walking down to the edge, the water lapping at his boots. He whispered, I didn't mean to kill him. The water didn't move. He said it louder this time. I didn't mean to. Still nothing, just the soft hiss of current against stone. Then, faint, almost too faint to be real, came a sound. Not the water, not the wind. Footsteps, behind him. He turned sharply, hand on his revolver. Nothing. The fire burned steady up on the bank. Evelyn hadn't moved. He exhaled shakily. Maybe his nerves were finally fraying. He turned back, and froze. There was someone standing across the river. A man, tall and still, hat pulled low, coat hanging heavy with water. No features, just a shadow in the moonlight. Lucas's throat went dry. He lifted his lantern, light trembling across the surface. The man didn't move, but Lucas saw the glint of metal, a badge on his chest. Not his, not anymore. Lucas's voice cracked. Tom? The figure didn't answer. He took a step forward. Tom Lyle, that you? A long silence. Then, a whisper carried by the wind, thin as a sigh. You promised her. Lucas's stomach turned cold. He took another step toward the river, boots sinking into the wet sand. The man's head tilted, and Lucas caught sight of his face. Half of it was gone. Eaten by river silt and time, the other half smiling faintly. Lucas stumbled backward, heart pounding. You're not real. But the air around him grew colder, the sound of the river louder, heavier. The man across the water raised his hand, the same pale, scarred hand Lucas had seen rise from the depths. And in it, gleaming under moonlight, was the badge. Tom's voice echoed now, clear, broken, hollow. You wore it, to hide what you did. Lucas shook his head, clutching his revolver. I did my job. You killed me before the sun rose. That's a lie. The river stirred, churning violently now. Water splashed against the banks, soaking his boots. Evelyn's voice rose behind him. Lucas, don't look at him. He turned, but she wasn't on the bank anymore. She was standing in the river. Waist deep, hair loose and wild, eyes wide and glassy. He shouted, Get out of there. She didn't move, her hands hung limp at her sides. The water around her seemed to pull, coil, breathe. And then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. Sheriff Hale, the voice drawled. You swore on that badge. You swore to protect. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. It was Tom's voice, through her mouth. You shot me before I could draw, she whispered. Because you wanted her. Lucas staggered back, shaking his head violently. No, that's not true. Evelyn's body moved toward him, the current parting around her like something alive. Tell her, the voice hissed. Tell her what you did. Lucas's revolver trembled in his hand. He aimed it at her, or at him, or whatever had taken her, but his finger wouldn't move. The river surged again, and suddenly Evelyn was inches away, her hand pressed to his chest. Her eyes flickered, between fear and fury, between hers and his. Why, Lucas? She whispered. Why did you do it? He couldn't speak. The truth clawed its way up through his chest. Because he had wanted her. Because he'd seen Tom Lyle, drunk and shouting, dragging her by the arm, and something inside him had snapped. The gun had fired before thought, before law, before mercy. The water hissed louder now, curling around his boots, rising fast. Lucas dropped to his knees, clutching her shoulders. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so damn sorry. Her expression softened for a heartbeat, then went utterly blank. You can't ask forgiveness from the dead, she said. And the river surged up, swallowing them both. The lantern fell. The fire hissed out. The canyon went dark again. Only the river remained, smooth, silent, waiting. By morning, the horses were gone. The camp was empty. And on the riverbank, half buried in sand, lay a sheriff's badge. The engraving had changed once more. It no longer said murderer. The dawn came quiet, too quiet for the living. Mist clung to the canyon floor like smoke from an old war that refused to end. The river ran still, heavy and silver, carrying whispers no man could hear without losing himself. That's when she rose. At first, it looked like the river was birthing light, a shimmer breaking through the fog. But then came a hand, pale as porcelain, gripping the reeds. Then another, and from the water, Evelyn Lyle pulled herself into the waking day. Her dress clung to her skin like mourning cloth. The lace was torn, stained with mud and blood, her hair tangled with riverweed. Yet her face was calm, empty, eyes open, but seeing something beyond the land around her. She stumbled to the shore and fell to her knees, coughing out water so dark it seemed to carry the bottom of the river with it. For a long moment, she didn't move. Just the wind and the sound of wings, a raven perched nearby, watching as if it had been waiting. Evelyn raised her head slowly. Her lips trembled as she spoke. Lucas? The name came out more like a breath than a word, as though she was uncertain whether it was prayer, curse, or memory. She stood, barefoot, the earth cold beneath her. There was no sign of him, no campfire, no horses, no man. Only the river, and on its edge, half buried in sand, gleamed a badge. She bent down, brushing it off. The metal was cold as ice. The engraving glimmered faintly in the new light. Evelyn stared at it, heart-twisting. The river lapped quietly against the shore, almost like it was listening. He's gone, she whispered. Ain't he? The wind answered in a sigh through the reeds. She closed her eyes, feeling tears rise, not warm, but cold, like the water itself had wept through her. She looked up again, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless gold and shadow. Somewhere, far off, a hawk cried. The world felt emptier than before. Or maybe she did. She clutched the badge tight and began to walk. By midday, she reached the old road. Wagon tracks still cut through the dust, fading toward the distant ridge. She walked barefoot, each step cracking dry mud, leaving faint, damp prints that dried seconds later. A rider appeared behind her before she heard him, a dark figure on a pale horse. The sound of hooves broke the silence. When she turned, the man slowed, his eyes narrowing beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Ma'am, he said cautiously, you all right? His name was Marshall Dunning, a lawman out of Tularosa. He'd come chasing a band of horse thieves, not expecting to find a woman half dead on the trail. Evelyn said nothing at first. Her lips moved slowly. The river took him. The marshal frowned. Took who, ma'am? Her gaze wandered past him, to something far behind, something only she could see. The man who wore this, she said, holding up the badge. He was a good man once. Till he wasn't. The marshal dismounted, kneeling by her. The way she spoke sent a chill through him. Her skin was cold, too cold, even for dawn. He tried to wrap her in his coat, but she didn't seem to feel it. Ma'am, he said gently, you need to come with me. We'll get you warm. She looked at him then, and for a heartbeat, her eyes weren't her own. They shimmered dark, river deep. I don't cross rivers no more, she said softly. The marshal froze. Beg your pardon? She blinked, and the spell broke. Nothing. It's nothing. He helped her onto his horse, but the animal snorted and reared the moment she touched the reins. The marshal barely managed to steady it. The horse's eyes rolled white, nostrils flaring. Easy, he muttered, but the beast wouldn't calm. It wasn't fear of noise or scent, it was her. Evelyn looked away, ashamed. Animals don't take kindly to the touched, she murmured. The touched? The marshal repeated. She didn't answer, just held the badge tighter, whispering to herself, or maybe to the man it once belonged to. That night, they made camp near the ridge. The marshal couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the river, even though it was miles behind them. A soft, rolling sound, like breath in the dark. When he turned over, he saw her, sitting by the fire, staring into it the way Lucas once had. The flames danced across her face, and for a second, he could have sworn her reflection wasn't in her eyes, but the shimmer of running water. He cleared his throat quietly. Ma'am, that man you said the river took, he your husband? She hesitated. He was once. Was? She looked up at him then, her expression distant but steady. He ain't nothing now but what the river keeps. The marshal nodded slowly, unsure if she spoke in grief or madness. But the way she said it, calm, final, made the hairs on his arms rise. The fire flickered. She smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. Don't worry, Marshal, she said. The dead don't follow far. They know where they belong. He swallowed hard and looked away. But somewhere deep inside, he wasn't sure she was right. Because behind her, faintly lit by the fire's edge, two wet footprints led back toward the dark. Marshal Dunning had been a lawman for 20 years. He'd seen men shoot for less than $1, watched good women bury worse men, and he'd stood beside too many graves that never stayed quiet. But he'd never heard the dead whisper. Not until he rode with her. Evelyn Lyle rode behind him, silent as dusk. The horse didn't like her near, kept its ears pinned and its gait uneasy, but she'd said nothing about it. Only sat still, hands folded around the silver badge she wouldn't let go of. Every now and then, Dunning would glance back. She didn't blink much, just stared at the horizon, as though the world past the ridge was calling her by name. By the second day, the sky changed. Storm clouds rolled in, low and strange, carrying no wind. That's when Dunning heard it for the first time. At first, it was like distant thunder. Then it became a rhythm, uneven, hollow. Hoofbeats. He turned, scanning the empty plains. No riders. No dust trails. Just the sound, slow and steady, echoing across the desert floor like it was riding the wind itself. Evelyn didn't turn. She only whispered, "He's following." Dunning felt his stomach tighten. "Who?" he asked. Her voice came like a chill. "The one I left behind." He swallowed hard, glancing back at the fading river far behind them. "Lady, if someone's after you, I'll see to it." She cut him off softly. "You can't arrest the dead, Marshal." He didn't answer after that. Didn't have words for what her eyes looked like when she said it, far away, shimmering like water under moonlight. That night, they camped near a line of cottonwoods. Dunning set the fire high, though the air was warm. He told himself it was to keep animals off. But really, he just didn't want darkness pressing too close. Evelyn sat across from him, still in that torn dress, brushing out her hair with fingers that shook slightly. The firelight painted her skin in gold and shadow. "You should rest," he said. Her eyes lifted to his, calm but hollow. "I don't sleep much anymore." He stirred the fire with a stick. "You got family somewhere?" She smiled faintly. "Had, before the river." He frowned. "You talk about that river like it's got a mind." She didn't answer. Just turned her gaze back toward the black line of horizon. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "It remembers what it's owed." Dunning leaned back, uneasy. "Ma'am, you keep talking like that and I'll start thinking you're running from something that ain't breathing." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Ain't running, Marshal, just walking until it stops following." He wanted to laugh it off, but the words sat heavy in his chest. The fire hissed. The wind shifted. Then, from somewhere out in the dark, came a low creak. Like old leather, or a saddle shifting. The marshal froze. His hand went to his revolver. "Who's there?" he called. Silence. Then, clop. A single hoofbeat. Close. Too close. He rose to his feet, cocking his pistol. Show yourself. The sound came again, but this time, behind him. He turned fast, and found nothing. Just the firelight flickering across the sand. But Evelyn's face had changed. She was looking past him, eyes wide, lips parting in something between a prayer and a scream. Dunning spun around. There, just beyond the firelight, stood a horse. Or what was left of one. It was pale, half-rotted, mane dripping riverweed. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, like cold fire. And on its back, still and upright, sat a man in a soaked coat and a badge glinting under the moon. Dunning froze, heart hammering. Jesus Almighty! The rider didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched them. Evelyn stood slowly. Lucas, she whispered. The name rolled through the air like a curse. The figure tilted its head slightly, and Dunning swore he saw water drip from its hat brim, running down where a face should have been. Ma'am, the marshal said quietly, get back. But she stepped forward instead. Lucas, she said again, louder. You ain't supposed to be here. The wind rose suddenly, scattering embers across the sand. The horse's hooves sank without sound. When the marshal blinked, both rider and horse were gone. Only the smell of wet earth lingered, and in the firelight's flicker, Dunning saw a new mark in the dirt, a single, fresh hoofprint. Wet, still glistening. Evelyn turned back, eyes hollow. He's closer now. It began as a whisper, the kind of sound you'd swear was wind through the mesquite, until it carried something heavier. Water. Moving water. Marshal Dunning reined his horse hard, his pulse spiking. They were in the middle of dry land, nothing but dust for 50 miles. But there it was, the unmistakable rush of a river that had no business being there. Evelyn sat still behind him, her dress rippling though the air was dead calm. It found us, she murmured. The marshal looked at her, eyes wide. What in God's name are you talking about? She turned to face the horizon. The light was strange, dull, metallic. The sky itself seemed to bend. And out there, crawling across the desert floor like something alive, came a sheet of silver. It shimmered and spread, rippling as though the desert itself was remembering what it used to be. The river don't stay where you leave it, she whispered. It goes where it's owed. The marshal didn't waste another breath. He kicked the horse hard and they rode, hooves pounding dry clay, breath burning. The water followed fast, curling through canyons and gullies, swallowing the land like a living thing. He risked a glance back, and froze. The river was chasing them. No, not just water. There were shapes in it. Riders, horses half formed of mist and foam, galloping through the flood, their faces pale and featureless. And at their head rode a man, coat dripping, hat pulled low, his badge gleaming faintly in the stormlight. Lucas Hale. Evelyn screamed, clutching the marshal's coat. Don't stop. He didn't. The ridge loomed ahead, red stone rising from the earth like a wound. If they could reach it, maybe they'd find high ground. But the river was faster. It rolled and surged, gaining on them with a roar that shook the valley. The air turned wet, heavy, cold. The horse stumbled once, twice, nearly going down. Dunning hauled the reins and cursed under his breath. The water hit seconds later. It struck like a wall, icy, strong, merciless. It tore the reins from his hands and ripped the horse's footing clean from under them. He barely managed to grab Evelyn before the current took them both. The world spun into chaos, water and mud, flashes of sky, the sound of screaming horses and whispering ghosts. Dunning tried to breathe, but the river poured into his mouth, cold as steel. He saw shapes all around them, faces in the current, eyes open, mouths moving soundlessly. He reached for Evelyn, but she was gone. The current dragged him under again. Down in the black, he saw something glimmering, a badge. Not his, hers. And then he saw him. Lucas Hale, or what was left of him, drifting toward him through the dark. His eyes burned with pale light, his mouth moving without sound. But Dunning could hear it, somehow. The words echoed inside his skull. She brought me home. The marshal thrashed, trying to surface. The current was too strong. The voice came again, closer now, rising through the water like thunder. She promised to take me across. But the dead don't cross the river alone. A hand clamped around Dunning's arm. He kicked, fought, twisted, but it wasn't the ghost's hand. It was Evelyn's. She was pulling him up, her eyes wide, her hair floating like ink in the current. He broke the surface with a gasp, coughing river water. The flood raged all around them, the ridge still a mile off, but somehow it didn't matter. The ghostly riders were circling now, galloping through the waves, closing in. Evelyn shouted something, but the wind drowned it out. He caught only a few words, the badge. Throw it back. He looked down, and realized his hand still clutched the badge. The one that read redeemed. The water churned harder, darker. The ghost of Lucas rode closer, face breaking into something like a smile. You can't keep what belongs to the river, he said, though his lips didn't move. Evelyn screamed, Marshall, do it. He hurled the badge as hard as he could. It spun once, glinting in the gray light, and vanished beneath the surface. The river went silent. The roar died in an instant. The current stopped pulling. The riders faded, dissolving like smoke. And for the first time since the chase began, the world was utterly still. Dunning blinked, dazed. The water was gone. Dry ground stretched all around them. The horses were gone, too. Only the faint smell of rain lingered. He turned to Evelyn. She stood beside him, soaked, shaking. But there was something different about her now, something almost lighter. It's over, he said. She smiled faintly. For you, maybe. Before he could ask, she stepped back, 1, 2 steps, and her boots sank into the earth. He reached for her hand, but it slipped through his fingers like mist. Wait, he cried. What are you doing? Her eyes shimmered. Keeping my promise. And then, just like that, she was gone. The ground where she'd stood turned wet again. The sound of the river returned, soft, distant, eternal. Marshall Dunning dropped to his knees, breathing hard. The desert was quiet again, the sun breaking through the clouds. He looked down, and there in the mud, half buried beside his boot, something glinted faintly. The badge. He picked it up with trembling fingers. The engraving had changed once more. Years passed. The West changed, but some stories never left its dust. They say Marshall Dunning rode out of the desert alone that day, pale as bone and half mad from thirst. He was found outside a border town with a silver badge in his hand and river mud on his boots, though no river ran within 100 miles. He told no one what he'd seen. Not the preacher, not the undertaker, not the sheriff who asked how he got that scar across his chest. He just handed over his star, bought a room above the saloon, and drank until the days blurred like heat waves. Sometimes, when the bottle ran dry, he'd pull out the badge, the one that didn't belong to him, and stare at the engraving. He never said whose badge it was. And no one ever asked twice. It was 5 years later when the rains came. The kind of storm the desert hadn't seen in generations. The dry gullies swelled, the canyons roared, and for 3 nights the ground trembled like it was remembering something old and angry. By morning, the flood had carved a new riverbed through the valley. The locals called it the Widow's Crossing. Cattle wouldn't graze near it. Horses shied from its banks. And every now and then, someone camping too close swore they heard hoofbeats, slow, steady, far off, riding through the fog. Marshall Dunning heard it too. Even in town, the sound carried to him. Late at night, he'd wake to that rhythm. One rider, one horse, moving through water that shouldn't exist. He started walking out to the edge of town, night after night, to listen. He never went far, just far enough to see the moonlight shimmer over the dunes where the river used to be. That's where the dreams began. In the dreams, the river was back. Still, black, endless. And on the far bank stood her. Evelyn Lyle. Dress clean, hair shining, a faint smile on her face. She didn't speak at first. Just looked at him the way only the dead can look at the living. Like she saw everything he'd ever done, and still forgave him for it. Then she'd whisper, "It's quieter here." He'd wake drenched in sweat, the sound of running water fading from his ears. Every time, he swore he'd stop going out there. But the next night, he always did. The last time anyone saw him was the night of the red moon. The barkeep said he left his badge on the counter, said only 3 words before he walked out the door. She called again. They found his horse 2 days later, standing by the new riverbank, reins dragging in the mud. But of the marshal, there was no sign. Only footprints leading down to the water, and none coming back. Years turned into decades. The towns faded. The railroads came. The land changed, but the river stayed. Travelers still spoke of it. How the wind sounded like voices at night. How you could sometimes see two figures riding across the shallows when the moon was full. A man and a woman. He rides ahead, hat low, coat heavy with rain. She follows close, veil trailing like mist, her laughter soft and sad. Some say it's Lucas Hale and his bride, forever crossing, forever returning. Some say the river won't let them go, bound to its curse until the last star fades. But the old-timers, the ones who've sat by the banks and listened long enough, they say different. They say the river ain't a curse at all. It's a promise kept. That when love is strong enough to defy the law of death itself, it carves its own path through the desert, a silver vein that never dries, a whisper that never stops. The young folk don't believe it. They laugh, throw stones, watch the ripples fade. But the wind always answers them back, carrying the sound of hooves, faint but steady. A man's deep voice calling softly, and a woman's laughter following close behind. And if you ever find yourself out there, alone, somewhere between the canyon and the sun, listen close when the wind changes. You might just hear the river. And if you do, don't speak. Don't move. Just tip your hat, and let it pass. Because the river never forgets. And love that dies in water, don't stay buried long.